Sign it right now, old man. You are completely senile, and I have already called the city inspectors on this rat-infested dump. My daughter-in-law, Chelsea, slammed a thick stack of legal papers onto the scratched glass counter of my hardware store. She stood there, crossing her arms over her expensive designer blouse, glaring at me with pure venom in her eyes. Behind her stood a sweaty, nervous-looking man in a cheap polyester suit, shifting his weight from side to side. He was holding a shiny gold pen and a fake notary stamp. My son Andre was nowhere to be seen. He had conveniently let his wife do the dirty work. I slowly wiped my hands on my grease-stained apron, ignoring her shrieking voice for a moment. I am 75 years old, and I have spent 4 decades building my life, from the ground up, right here in Atlanta. I know a scam when I see one. I looked down at the document she had so violently thrown onto my counter. It was a transfer of ownership form. The wording demanded the immediate signing over of Vanguard SLC to Chelsea and my son. I kept my face entirely blank, but inside I was laughing so hard my ribs ached. Chelsea looked around my dusty hardware store with absolute disgust, wrinkling her nose at the smell of motor oil and cut pine. She thought Vanguard LLC was just the legal name for this single rundown building. She was so blinded by her own greed and arrogance that she had not done even a single ounce of real research. She had no idea what that company name actually held. Before I continue this story and tell you how this privileged little girl just handed me the keys to her own destruction, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to arrogant people who completely underestimated your worth. To understand how a 28-year-old woman felt bold enough to march into my shop and demand my property, you have to understand what happened exactly 1 month ago. It was the day of Andre and Chelsea's wedding. I had spent my entire life working to give Andre the opportunities I never had growing up. I paid for his college in full. I bought his first car. I taught him how to be a man. But over the last few years, as he climbed the corporate ladder, he started acting like my calloused hands and blue-collar business were something to be ashamed of. When he met Chelsea, things only got worse. She was from a wealthy white family that loved to flaunt their money. From the moment we met, she looked at me like I was something she had scraped off the bottom of her expensive high heels. The wedding was held at an obscenely overpriced country club on the north side of the city. I arrived wearing my best charcoal suit. It was 10 years old, but it was tailored clean and pressed. I walked into the grand ballroom, expecting to be seated up front with my son. Instead, the wedding planner glanced at her clipboard and escorted me all the way to the absolute back of the venue. I was placed at a small wobbly table, shoved right next to the swinging kitchen doors. Every time a waiter rushed past my chair was bumped. I looked at the people seated with me. They were Chelsea's distant, unwanted relatives. An eccentric great-uncle who was already drunk, and a cousin who complained loudly about the temperature of the room. I looked across the massive sea of flowers and crystal centerpieces toward the front of the room. Chelsea's parents and their country club friends dominated the VIP section. They were laughing and clinking expensive champagne glasses, practically glowing with self-importance. I watched my son Andre sitting at the head table in a tuxedo that probably cost more than my first car. I waited for him to look my way to catch my eye and maybe give me an apologetic smile. But he never did. He looked everywhere except at the dark corner where his father had been banished. He was too busy playing the role of the wealthy, successful groom to acknowledge the man who paved the way for his success. My late wife Vivian would have marched right up to that head table and demanded respect, but Vivian passed away 10 years ago. Without her, I simply sat there swallowing my pride for the sake of my son's big day. Halfway through the dinner, the noise of the clattering plates and the terrible acoustics near the kitchen became too much for my ears. I needed a moment of quiet. I stood up and walked out into the long marble-floored hallway, heading toward the restrooms. The hallway was empty and quiet, a stark contrast to the loud music vibrating through the ballroom walls. As I approached the ladies' lounge, I heard familiar voices echoing out of the slightly cracked door. It was Chelsea and her bridesmaids. I stopped in my tracks when I heard my own name mentioned. "Did you see his shoes?" one of the bridesmaids asked, laughing. "I cannot believe Andre let his dad show up to your wedding looking like he just got off a construction site." Then came Chelsea's voice, dripping with unimaginable contempt. "Andre's dad is a walking embarrassment. I specifically told the planner to put him near the kitchen so he would not ruin the aesthetic of the wedding photos. I do not even know why Andre still talks to him. The old man just sits in that filthy hardware store all day playing with rusty nails." A heavy silence fell over me. I stood frozen in the hallway listening to the woman my son had chosen to marry, tear down my dignity without a second thought. "Do not worry about it," Chelsea continued, her tone shifting from annoyed to calculating. "I am already dealing with it. As soon as we get back from our honeymoon in the Bahamas, I am making Andre force his dad to sign over that garbage hardware store. That whole block is gentrifying so fast it is ridiculous. Property values are skyrocketing. We are going to bulldoze his dusty little shop and open a high-end matcha cafe. It will be a gold mine. And if the old man resists, I will just convince Andre that his dad is getting too old and confused to run a business anyway. He is too senile to know what that land is actually worth." Hearing those words did not make me burst into tears. It did not make me want to kick the door open and scream at her. I am a man who has survived recessions, economic downturns, and the harsh realities of being a black business owner in the South. You do not survive that long by reacting with blind emotion. You survive by gathering intelligence and striking when the time is right. I realized right then and there that my son had married a predator. Chelsea was a gold digger disguising herself as a high society princess. But she was a foolish predator. She was making plans based on assumptions and arrogance. She assumed I was just a poor old man clinging to a failing retail store. She assumed my silence meant I was weak. She assumed wrong. I took a deep breath, smoothed the lapels of my 10-year-old suit, and turned around. I walked back down the long marble hallway and returned to my seat by the swinging kitchen doors. The waiter dropped a plate of lukewarm chicken in front of me, but I had completely lost my appetite. I sat there for a few minutes watching the head table. I watched Andre smiling and kissing the cheek of a woman who was actively plotting to strip his father of his livelihood. He looked so happy, so completely oblivious to the snake he had just tied his life to. I reached into the inner pocket of my suit jacket. Before the wedding, I had gone to the bank and prepared a certified cashier's check for $50,000. It was meant to be a surprise gift to help them start their new life together. I had planned to pull Andre aside after the cake cutting and hand it to him. Instead, I slowly slid that envelope back into my pocket. I reached into my other pocket and pulled out my regular checkbook. I wrote out a standard personal check for $500. It was a generous enough gift for a regular guest, but a far cry from what a loving father would give. I placed the check inside a plain white envelope and wrote their names on the front. I stood up from the table, leaving my dinner completely untouched. I placed the plain white envelope on the gift table near the exit. I did not say goodbye to the bride and groom. I did not stay for the speeches or the dancing. I walked out the back doors of the country club and stepped into the cool night air before the tiered wedding cake was even sliced. Walking toward my old reliable pickup truck in the far back of the parking lot, I made a silent promise to myself. I had spent Andre's entire life protecting him from the harshness of the world. I had sheltered him, provided for him, and shielded him from the consequences of his bad decisions. But I was not going to protect him from this. I was going to let Chelsea play her little game. I was going to let them try to take my empire. Because sometimes the only way a boy can truly become a man is by watching his entire world burn to the ground so he can learn how to build it back the right way. I started the engine of my truck, drove away from the flashing lights of the country club, and began to prepare for a war they did not even know they had started. 2 weeks had passed since the terrible display of disrespect at the wedding. I was exactly where I always was on a Tuesday afternoon, standing behind the scratched wooden counter of Eugene and Son Hardware. The air inside the shop was heavy with the familiar and comforting scents of cut pine sawdust, motor oil, and aging metal. I was organizing a new shipment of heavy-duty wrenches, wiping down the cold steel with a rag and feeling the solid weight of honest work in my hands. It was quiet and peaceful, in a way that only a place you have built from the ground up can be. Then the brass bell above the front glass door jingled loudly, shattering the calm silence of my sanctuary. I looked up from my work, expecting to see one of my regular contractors coming in for supplies. Instead, I saw my son Andre walking through the door. Right beside him was his new wife, Chelsea. She stepped over the threshold like she was entering a toxic waste dump. Immediately, she brought a perfectly manicured hand up to her face, pressing a silk handkerchief over her nose and mouth. She let out a loud, exaggerated cough, waving her other hand in front of her face, as if the very air inside my store was poisoning her lungs. She was wearing a pristine white designer dress and sharp heels that probably cost more than the entire inventory of my front aisle. "Look at this floor," she complained, her voice echoing shrilly against the metal shelves and exposed brick walls. "Andre, you did not tell me I would be stepping into a literal hazard zone. My shoes are going to be completely ruined by all this disgusting grime. I cannot believe people actually walk in here." Andre trailed behind her, keeping his head down and his hands stuffed deep into his pockets. He looked like a man walking toward his own execution. He was wearing a sharp-tailored suit that screamed corporate success, but his posture was heavily slouched and his shoulders were hunched. He did not look anything like the proud, successful man he pretended to be at the country club just a few weeks ago. He looked like a frightened little boy who was completely terrified of the woman leading the way. I placed the steel wrench I was holding down on the counter very slowly. I did not greet them. I did not smile. I simply waited, letting the heavy silence stretch out across the room, forcing them to speak first. Chelsea glared at the thin layer of dust on the counter, refusing to step too close to where I stood. "We need to talk to you, Eugene," she said, dropping the handkerchief but keeping her face scrunched in absolute disgust. "It is about your future." I shifted my gaze away from her and looked directly at my son. "What about my future?" "Andre," I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level and calm. Andre swallowed hard. He avoided looking into my eyes. He reached into the inner pocket of his expensive suit jacket, his hand trembling slightly as he pulled out a thick, glossy folder. He slid it across the scratched glass counter toward me. I looked down at it without touching it. The cover featured a bright picture of a smiling, perfectly groomed elderly couple sitting on a pristine, manicured lawn. The bold, elegant letters printed across the top of the folder read Shady Pines Premium Assisted Living. I stared at the brochure for a long moment and then looked back up at my son. I felt a cold, hard knot form in the pit of my stomach, but my face remained completely still, like carved stone. "What is this?" I asked, my tone dropping dangerously low. Andre opened his mouth to speak, but he just stammered, unable to find his courage or his words. Chelsea rolled her eyes heavily and forcefully pushed him aside, stepping right up to the counter. She completely changed her tone in an instant, suddenly adopting a sickeningly sweet, patronizing voice like she was talking to a confused toddler. "We are just so worried about you, Eugene," she said, leaning in slightly but still careful not to let her expensive dress touch the wood. "You are 75 years old. You are spending your golden years rotting away in this dark, depressing little shop all by yourself. Andre and I have been talking for a while, and we just do not think it is safe for you to be working anymore. I mean, just the other day, Andre mentioned that you were mixing up the inventory. You are putting the wrong screws in the wrong boxes and forgetting where things are. Your mind is clearly starting to slip, and it breaks our hearts to see you struggle like this." It was a blatant and entirely fabricated lie. I knew the exact location of every single nail, screw, hammer, and tool in this entire building. I could navigate the aisles of this store completely blindfolded. I had never mixed up a single piece of inventory in 40 years. But I did not interrupt her. I did not defend myself. I let her keep digging her own grave with her words. So we came up with a wonderful solution. Chelsea continued, her fake sugary smile stretching even wider across her face. We have decided that it is time for you to finally retire. Shady Pines is a top-tier luxury facility. They have 24-hour nursing staff, weekly bingo nights, and people your own age for you to talk to. It is the perfect place for you to go and rest your tired bones. Of course, a luxury facility like that is incredibly expensive, but Andre and I are willing to help you out. We will generously take over the deed to this hardware store. It is a massive burden that you no longer need to carry on your old shoulders. She paused for dramatic effect, placing her hand over her heart as if she were doing me the greatest favor in the history of the world. Once you sign the property over to us, we will handle the stressful demolition process. We are going to completely bulldoze this eyesore and turn the land into a high-end luxury boutique. And because we love you so much, we are going to use a fraction of our monthly profits to pay for your room at Shady Pines. You will not have to worry about a single thing ever again. All you have to do is sign the deed transfer over to us today, and we will take care of the rest. She stood there beaming at me, fully expecting me to fall to my knees in tears of gratitude. She genuinely believed that her master plan was foolproof. She thought she had cornered a confused, tired old man and offered him a shiny piece of candy in exchange for his entire livelihood. She thought I was too stupid to realize she was trying to steal my property, bulldoze my late wife Vivian's memory, and lock me away in a waiting room for death so she could fund her lavish lifestyle. The silence in the store was absolute. The only sound was the faint hum of the ceiling fan spinning lazily above us and the distant rumble of traffic outside. I did not touch the glossy brochure. I did not even look at Chelsea. I turned my eyes entirely back to Andre. I stared at him with a gaze so intense and full of disappointment that I saw him physically shrink backward. "Is this what you want, Andre?" I asked, my voice dropping into a rumble that demanded the truth. "Look me in the eye as a man and tell me that this is what you want. You want to take the store your mother and I built with our bare hands, tear it down to the dirt, and lock your perfectly healthy father in a nursing home." Andre looked at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then glanced nervously at Chelsea like a frightened dog waiting for its master to give it permission to speak. "Mom passed away a long time ago, Dad," he mumbled weakly, his voice shaking. "And Chelsea is right about the neighborhood. The area is changing fast. You cannot keep up anymore. It is just business, Dad. You have to be reasonable." He could not even look me in the eye while he sold me out. The betrayal stung deeply, leaving a dull, throbbing ache in my chest, but I refused to let them see me bleed. I had survived far worse things in my 75 years on this earth than a cowardly son and a greedy daughter-in-law. I looked back at Chelsea, my expression hardening into absolute ice. "My answer is no," I said coldly. "Take your little brochure and get out of my store." Chelsea's fake smile vanished instantly. The sugary, sweet facade cracked and shattered completely, revealing the vicious, entitled monster underneath. Her face turned red with fury, and she slammed her manicured hand against the counter, finally not caring about the dust getting on her skin. "Do not be a selfish boomer," she hissed, her voice shrill and venomous, echoing loudly in the quiet shop. "You are sitting on prime real estate, doing absolutely nothing with it. You are holding Andre back from the lifestyle I deserve. Do you have any idea how much debt we are in right now because of the wedding? We need this property to get ahead. You have already lived your life, so stop ruining ours. You belong in a home where someone can wipe your chin and keep you out of the way." I stood up, perfectly straight, towering over her, drawing on every ounce of strength and unyielding authority I possessed. I pointed a thick, calloused finger directly at the front glass door. I said, "Get out." I commanded, my voice booming off the metal walls with absolute finality. "You come into my place of business, you insult my mind, and you try to steal the legacy I built with my wife. You are nothing but a parasite. Chelsea, and my son is an absolute fool for letting you attach yourself to him. If either of you ever bring a nursing home brochure into my presence again, I will make sure you do not get a single rusty nail from me when I am put in the ground." Chelsea gasped, stepping back as if I had physically struck her across the face. She grabbed Andre by the arm, her nails digging fiercely into his expensive suit jacket. "Come on, Andre," she spat, glaring at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. "We are leaving this dump. But hear me clearly, old man. We will get this place one way or another. You cannot fight progress, and you certainly cannot fight us." She spun around on her heels and marched out the door, her shoes clicking furiously against the concrete floor. Andre lingered for just a fraction of a second, looking at me with a pathetic mix of profound guilt and terror, before turning his back and following his wife out into the busy street. I stood completely alone in the quiet of my store, watching them drive away in their overpriced car. They thought they had just declared war on a defenseless, clueless old man. They had absolutely no idea they had just stepped into the ring with a titan who owned the ground they were walking on. A week had passed since they tried to hand me that nursing home brochure and insult my intelligence in my own place of business. I was sitting in the small back office of my hardware store, sorting through a stack of supplier invoices when my cell phone buzzed in the front pocket of my overalls. I pulled it out and tapped the screen. It was an automated alert from my bank, a high-value withdrawal notification. I put on my reading glasses and stared closely at the glowing green numbers. Exactly $15,000 had just been electronically transferred out of an old joint emergency savings account. My chest tightened, but I did not panic, and I certainly did not shout. I knew exactly what that account was, and I knew exactly who had just emptied it. When Andre was 19 years old and heading off to out-of-state college, I marched into that bank and opened that joint account for him. I deposited a chunk of my hard-earned profits and told him it was a sacred safety net. I explained that if his car ever broke down on the highway, or if he had a sudden medical emergency, he could use that money to survive. It was meant to give a young man peace of mind. After he graduated, got his fancy corporate job, and started making his own salary, he stopped using it altogether. But I never took his name off the account. Recently, after I saw how much crippling debt he and Chelsea were racking up to fund their fake millionaire lifestyle, I deliberately moved exactly $15,000 into that forgotten account. It was a silent test of character. I wanted to see if the boy I raised to be an honest, hard-working man would come to me and ask for financial help, looking me in the eye, or if he would sink to the level of a common street thief to satisfy his extremely greedy wife. Now, staring at the zero balance on my cracked phone screen, I had my definitive answer. Andre had failed the test completely and spectacularly. He had chosen to steal from his own flesh and blood. The pain that washed over me was not the sharp, sudden sting of shock. It was a deep, cold ache of profound disappointment that settled right into my bones. I had poured my sweat and blood into making sure he never had to steal a single dime to survive. I had sacrificed my own comfort, worked 70-hour weeks, and broken my back, carrying heavy lumber just so he could walk tall in this world. And he threw all those valuable life lessons away for a woman who viewed us both as nothing more than walking dollar signs. I picked up my phone and dialed his number. The phone rang 3 times before he finally answered. The line was dead quiet for a long second. He knew exactly why I was calling, but he was too much of a coward to speak first. "Andre," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm and incredibly flat. "I just got an alert from the bank. $15,000 is missing from your college emergency fund. Would you care to explain why you felt the sudden need to rob your own father?" There was a heavy, heavy pause on the other end of the line. I could hear his rapid, nervous breathing. And then the guilt he was feeling quickly morphed into a defensive, explosive rage. He did not apologize for the theft. He did not show a single ounce of remorse for breaking my trust. He started shouting at me through the speaker, his voice echoing loudly off the wooden walls of my small office. "Do not call me a thief," he yelled, his tone dripping with misplaced righteous anger. Chelsea needed a massive down payment for a brand new luxury condo in Midtown. We could not stay in that cramped, terrible apartment anymore, not with her wealthy parents coming to visit for the holidays. You have no idea how much debt we are in right now, Dad. The wedding, the honeymoon to the Bahamas, the designer clothes for the reception. We are completely drowning in credit card bills, and you are just sitting on that stupid pile of rust and wood acting like everything is fine. I listened in utter silence as my only son tried to justify grand larceny. His sense of entitlement was absolutely staggering. If you had just been a reasonable father and sold that stupid hardware store when we asked you to, we would not have been forced to take your money, he screamed, trying desperately to shift the blame onto my shoulders. You are hoarding wealth, Dad. You do not even need $15,000 to live in your old rundown house. We need it to build our future. We did not steal it. We just took what is rightfully ours anyway. You are holding us back. You should be helping us succeed, but instead, you are just a stubborn old man standing in the way of my happiness. His cruel words were like physical daggers, but I absolutely refused to let him hear me bleed. I realized then that Chelsea had completely poisoned his mind. She had convinced him that my life savings and my property were his personal piggy bank. He had completely lost his identity as a strong, independent man and had become a spineless puppet, dancing happily on her strings. He was actually blaming his own father for the massive crippling debt he chose to take on just to impress a woman who did not even respect him. Before I could respond to his pathetic, weak excuses, I heard a sudden violent scuffle on the other end of the line. There was the loud sound of a phone being snatched away, and then a sharp, heavy intake of breath. Chelsea's shrill, hysterical voice blasted through the speaker, hurting my ear with its sheer volume. "Listen to me, you stubborn old fool," she screamed, her voice vibrating with pure venom and unearned arrogance. "Andre is done asking nicely, and I am completely done playing games with you. We took that money because you owe it to us for putting up with your embarrassing behavior at our wedding. But $15,000 is just a tiny drop in the bucket compared to what we need right now to maintain our lifestyle." She paused to catch her breath, panting heavily into the microphone like a wild animal. "You are going to sign that property deed over to us by this Friday," she demanded, issuing her ultimate unhinged threat. "You are going to sign over that hardware store so we can sell the land to the commercial developers. If you do not give us exactly what we want by Friday morning, we are cutting you off completely and permanently. You will never be allowed to step foot in our new luxury condo. You will never be invited to another family holiday or birthday party. And when we eventually have children, you will never ever get to see your grandchildren. You will be completely erased from our lives as if you never existed." I closed my eyes slowly, letting her highly toxic words wash over me without breaking my calm composure for even a second. "If you do not sign that paper," Chelsea spat, her voice dropping into a dark, menacing hiss, "you will die completely alone in that rusty, rat-infested shop, and absolutely no one in this world will care." She finished her unhinged tirade and waited in silence. I could hear her breathing hard, fully expecting me to break down right then and there. She expected me to cry, to beg for forgiveness, to plead for future access to my unborn grandchildren. She genuinely thought the terrifying threat of dying alone would force me to hand over the incredible empire I had built with my late wife. She thought fear would conquer my mind. I opened my eyes and looked at the beautiful framed photograph of Vivian sitting on my desk. I took a slow, steady breath, channeling all the strength and wisdom of my ancestors. I did not raise my voice. I did not curse at her. I simply gave her the only answer a predator deserves. "Understood," I said softly and firmly. And I immediately hung up the phone. I stood up in my quiet, empty office. The deep sadness was completely gone now, replaced entirely by a pure, calculating focus. The emotional family ties were officially and permanently severed. They had crossed the point of no return, and there was no going back to the way things were. I picked up my phone once more and dialed a highly secure number I knew perfectly by heart. It rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered the call. "Good afternoon." "Mr. Mitchell, my private corporate attorney," Mr. Sterling said. "Sterling," I said, looking out the large window at the bustling growing street I completely owned. "They took the bait and stole the money. It is time to proceed with the final phase of the operation. Prepare the Vanguard legal documents, the transfer traps, and the eviction notices. The game is officially on." Friday morning arrived with a heavy gray sky pressing down on the city. I was standing behind the main counter of my hardware store, waiting for the inevitable. I knew they were coming because predators always return to finish off their prey when they think the prey is bleeding. At exactly 10 in the morning, the brass bell above the front entrance jingled violently. The heavy glass door swung open, and in marched my daughter-in-law Chelsea. She looked like a woman walking into a conquered territory with her chin held high and her shoulders pulled back. But she was not alone. Following closely behind her was a scrawny, nervous-looking man I had never seen before. He was wearing a cheap, shiny polyester suit that looked like it had been bought off a clearance rack 10 years ago. His tie was crooked, and he kept wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. He was clutching a faux leather briefcase tightly against his chest. I knew instantly what he was supposed to be. He was the fake notary they had brought along to make their little extortion scheme look official. And then there was my son Andre. He trailed behind the two of them like a beaten dog. He dragged his feet across the concrete floor, keeping his eyes glued to his expensive leather shoes. He could not even muster the basic courage to look at the man who had given him life. He was hiding behind his vicious wife, letting her lead the charge to destroy his own father. Watching him cower in the background, completely stripped of his dignity, broke whatever tiny shred of hope I had left for his redemption. The emergency fund theft had been a test of his honesty, but today was a test of his humanity. He was failing completely. Chelsea stopped right in front of the counter. She did not bother with greetings or pleasantries. She just glared at me with absolute contempt, as if my very existence was an offensive obstacle in her path. The nervous man in the cheap suit awkwardly shuffled up next to her, fumbling with the latches on his briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of stapled papers and a shiny gold pen, placing them on the scratched glass surface between us. Chelsea slammed her hand flat on top of the documents. The sound echoed sharply in the quiet store. She leaned forward, putting her face uncomfortably close to mine, and began to speak with a cold, calculating venom. She told me to listen very carefully because she was only going to say this once. She proudly announced that she had already filed a formal report with Adult Protective Services earlier that morning. She told them that her elderly father-in-law was suffering from severe advanced dementia and was becoming a danger to himself and the public. I kept my face completely emotionless as she laid out her wicked plan. She bragged about how she had also called the city health department and the fire marshal to report my store as a rat-infested fire hazard that needed to be condemned immediately. She said she had painted a picture of a crazy old man hoarding rusty metal and living in squalor. Her voice was steady and cruel. She was actively trying to rip away my freedom, my dignity, and my livelihood just to fund her luxury lifestyle. Then she pointed a sharp, manicured finger at the papers on the counter. She told me that those documents were a complete transfer of ownership. She demanded that I pick up the gold pen and sign the property and the business over to her and Andre right that very second. She looked me dead in the eye and delivered her final ultimatum. She said if I refused to sign, she would make sure the state stepped in by Monday morning. She threatened to have a judge declare me legally incompetent, strip me of all my basic human rights, and have me permanently committed to a locked psychiatric ward. She promised that she would take the store anyway, but if I fought her, she would make sure I spent the rest of my miserable life heavily medicated in a windowless room. It was a breathtaking display of pure evil. She was openly blackmailing a 75-year-old man, threatening him with institutionalization to steal his property. And right behind her stood my son, shifting his weight nervously, remaining entirely silent, while his wife threatened to lock his father away in an asylum. He was fully complicit in this monstrous extortion. I looked down at the heavy stack of papers resting on the counter. I slowly reached out and pulled the documents toward me. Chelsea smirked, thinking she had finally broken me. She thought the terrifying threat of a psychiatric ward had forced my hand. I adjusted my reading glasses and carefully read the top page. The legal document demanded the immediate and total transfer of Vanguard LLC to Chelsea and Andre. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to stop myself from laughing out loud. Chelsea sneered at me, telling me to hurry up and sign the Vanguard LLC transfer before she lost her patience. This was her fatal blind spot. This was the ultimate proof of her blinding arrogance and absolute stupidity. She honestly believed that Vanguard LLC was just the obscure legal name for this one single $200,000 hardware store. She had clearly gone online, found the property record for my store, saw it was owned by a company called Vanguard LLC, and told her fake notary to draft a blanket transfer document for the entire entity. She had absolutely no idea what she was actually demanding. She did not know that Vanguard LLC held the deeds to 12 massive commercial buildings across the entire city block, worth over $15 million. She thought she was stealing a rusty bucket of bolts, but she was actually trying to legally hijack a massive real estate empire. I looked at the fake notary, who was sweating profusely. Then I looked at Chelsea, who was tapping her foot impatiently. I took the gold pen in my hand. I held it for a long second, letting them taste the victory they thought was theirs. And then I set the pen down. I picked up the thick stack of legal papers firmly in both hands. Moving very slowly and very deliberately, I tore the entire stack of documents straight down the middle. Chelsea gasped, taking a shocked step backward. I put the torn halves together and ripped them again, shredding her foolish extortion attempt into useless pieces of confetti. I opened my hands and let the shredded paper fall to the floor right at her expensive designer shoes. Before she could even open her mouth to scream, I reached under the counter and pressed a silent red button. A loud, heavy electronic thud echoed through the store as the thick deadbolts on the front doors automatically locked. The fake notary jumped, nearly dropping his briefcase. I looked directly at Chelsea and spoke in a low, terrifying rumble. I told them that they had just made the biggest mistake of their pathetic lives. I pointed to the small, blinking red lights hidden in the upper corners of the ceiling. I calmly explained that my hardware store was equipped with a state-of-the-art high-definition audio and video security system. I told them that those cameras had just recorded every single word of her threatening an elderly man with institutionalization to extort his business. I told them that the footage was already uploaded to a secure cloud server and that my lawyers would be handing it directly to the district attorney for felony charges of elder abuse and criminal extortion. The color instantly drained from Chelsea's face. She went completely pale, her eyes wide with sudden paralyzing terror. The fake notary panicked completely. He started frantically backing away toward the door, begging me not to call the police, claiming he was just a friend doing a favor and did not want to go to prison. Andre finally looked up, his face twisted in pure horror, realizing that his life was about to be ruined by a felony conviction. They scrambled toward the front doors, pulling desperately at the locked handles trapped inside the very store they came to steal. I let them sweat for 10 agonizing seconds, watching them panic like rats in a trap. Then I pressed the button under the counter again, unlocking the doors. They burst out onto the sidewalk, gasping for air. But Chelsea could not accept defeat gracefully. Even as she ran away, her toxic pride made her turn around and scream one last desperate threat from the sidewalk. She yelled that I was going to regret this. She screamed that she knew the wealthy corporate developers who were currently buying up the entire block. She pointed a shaking finger at me and vowed that she was going to go straight to the corporate office of the Vanguard Real Estate Group. She swore she would meet with their executives and personally convince them to force a hostile buyout of my land just to see me thrown out on the street. I stood in the doorway of my shop and watched them speed away in their car. I could not help the slow, deep smile that spread across my face. She was going to the Vanguard corporate office to destroy me. I smiled because I knew exactly who she was going to meet when she got there. Watching the taillights of their car disappear down the road, I felt a profound sense of closure. The son I had raised was gone, completely consumed by the toxic ambition of a woman who viewed family as nothing more than a financial stepping stone. They had crossed every moral boundary, trying to declare me insane, trying to steal my legacy, and threatening to lock me away in a dark room until I died. But their boundless greed had made them blind. They were rushing headfirst into a corporate trap I had spent decades building. I picked up the shredded pieces of their fake legal document from the floor, tossing them into the trash bin behind the counter. Then I picked up the phone to call my attorney. I told Mr. Sterling that the rats had finally taken the bait and were heading straight toward the corporate tower. I told him to prepare the top-floor boardroom because the final judgment was about to begin. The game was no longer being played in the dust of an old hardware store. It was moving to the penthouse, and I was more than ready to show them what real power looked like, to truly understand the pure desperation driving Chelsea and my son. You have to look behind the heavy velvet curtain of their fake luxury lifestyle. They were living in a massive penthouse condo in Midtown Atlanta. The rent alone was $6,000 a month. And that did not even include the exorbitant maintenance fees, the private parking spaces, or the expensive amenities they bragged about to their friends. They desperately wanted to project the image of a wealthy, powerful couple to all the high society people they desperately wanted to impress. But the reality of their situation was a terrifying nightmare of crippling financial debt. By the time they stormed out of my hardware store after their failed extortion attempt, their credit cards were completely maxed out. Every single piece of designer clothing, every overpriced steak dinner, and every luxury vacation had been financed with plastic money they simply did not have. They were currently 3 full months behind on their rent. The wealthy property management company had already sent them a final warning letter threatening immediate eviction and legal action. Andre was terrified, losing sleep every single night, watching his fake empire crumble around him. Debt collectors were calling his phone constantly, and there were even threats of repossessing his luxury sports car. He had tried to take out another high-interest personal loan to cover their expenses, but the banks laughed right in his face. His credit score was completely destroyed. Chelsea, however, refused to accept defeat. She absolutely refused to downgrade her lavish lifestyle or admit to her wealthy country club parents that she had made a terrible mistake by marrying into debt. In her twisted, selfish mind, the only salvation left was my hardware store. She was absolutely convinced that if she could just force me out of the picture, she could sell the prime real estate for a massive payout. But since her blatant extortion attempt failed, she needed a completely new plan. She believed that the faceless corporate giants who supposedly owned the rest of the commercial block would pay absolutely anything to get their greedy hands on my valuable corner lot. She thought she could act as a rogue middleman, negotiate a hostile buyout, and walk away with a massive finder's fee. She was essentially planning to sell my entire life and my legacy to the highest corporate bidder, just to keep her luxury apartment for a few more months. Her greed was a dark, bottomless pit, and it was driving her straight into my waiting trap. Chelsea wasted absolutely no time putting her wicked plan into motion. The very next morning, she started making aggressive phone calls to the corporate headquarters of the Vanguard Real Estate Group. She was clever enough to use her maiden name, hoping to avoid any suspicion, just in case my hardware store name was flagged in their corporate system. She confidently told the front desk receptionist that she was an authorized legal representative for the stubborn owner of the corner hardware store. She claimed she had the legal leverage to force an immediate sale and was ready to negotiate a highly lucrative deal for the corporation. The call was immediately transferred to the desk of my private corporate attorney, Mr. Sterling. I had already warned him that they might try something exactly like this, so he was perfectly prepared for her nonsense. When Mr. Sterling picked up the heavy office phone, Chelsea launched right into her aggressive corporate sales pitch. She bragged extensively about how she could hand them the final piece of commercial property they needed to completely dominate the city block. She promised she could get the stubborn old man out of the building and locked into a state mental facility within a week if the buyout price was high enough. Mr. Sterling is a brilliant lawyer and an even better actor. He played his part perfectly. He kept his voice completely professional, sounding incredibly eager to hear her ruthless proposal. He told her that Vanguard had been desperately trying to acquire that specific hardware store for years, and that her phone call was a highly fortunate turn of events. He praised her sharp business sense, stroking her massive, fragile ego until she was practically purring through the phone receiver. He told her that a real estate deal of this magnitude required a face-to-face meeting with the highest-level executives in the company. He officially booked her and Andre for a private consultation the following Wednesday afternoon. He specifically reserved the main executive boardroom on the very top floor of our downtown glass skyscraper. Mr. Sterling recorded the entire conversation, so we had solid proof of her intent to commit fraud. When Chelsea hung up the phone, she genuinely believed she had just won the lottery. She thought she had outsmarted a multi-million-dollar corporation and a stubborn old man all in one single morning. She was so incredibly proud of herself for being ruthless. She had absolutely no idea that she had just made a formal reservation for her own total destruction. Wednesday afternoon arrived, and the scene unfolding in the grand lobby of the Vanguard corporate tower was almost comical to witness from the security cameras. I sat in my private office watching the live feed as Chelsea and Andre walked through the towering glass doors like they already owned the entire building and everyone inside it. Chelsea was wearing a brand new white designer pantsuit and carrying an incredibly expensive luxury handbag. Both items were undoubtedly purchased on a newly opened store credit card, pushing them even deeper into the dark abyss of consumer debt. She strutted across the polished imported marble floor, her sharp heels clicking loudly, demanding the complete attention of everyone in the massive room. Andre walked right beside her, trying his absolute best to look like a high-powered real estate executive, but his nervous, shifting eyes completely betrayed him. He kept looking around at the massive armed security guards and the sleek modern architecture, clearly intimidated by the immense display of wealth surrounding him. Chelsea marched straight up to the front reception desk. She did not politely introduce herself or wait her turn. She simply slammed her expensive purse onto the pristine counter and demanded to be taken up to the executive boardroom immediately. She treated the polite young receptionist like an absolute peasant, rolling her eyes and sighing very loudly when the girl calmly asked to see her identification. While they waited for their visitor security badges, Chelsea leaned over and whispered to Andre, her voice echoing slightly in the vast marble lobby. She told him to stop looking so pathetic and nervous. She promised him that once they sold his dad out to these corporate suits, they would walk away with at least $500,000 in cold, hard cash. She actually laughed out loud and said the old man can finally rot in a state-run facility while we drink expensive champagne on our brand-new yacht. Andre just nodded weakly, completely surrendering whatever tiny shred of basic human morality he had left in his soul. He was willing to throw away the man who raised him just to keep a woman who did not even respect him. A senior executive assistant arrived and escorted them to the private VIP elevator. They rode up 50 floors in total silence, stepping out into a massive, luxurious hallway lined with expensive modern art and rich mahogany paneling. The assistant led them straight to the main boardroom. It was a breathtaking space featuring a massive custom-built table and floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a stunning panoramic view of the entire Atlanta skyline. Chelsea walked right in and immediately took a seat near the head of the table, crossing her legs and smiling like a triumphant queen waiting to collect her golden crown. She looked out at the city below, feeling like she had finally conquered the world. They were sitting right in the very heart of the lion's den, waiting to negotiate the sale of my life. And they were about to find out exactly who the lion really was. Chelsea and Andre were sitting in the massive boardroom, admiring the stunning panoramic view of the city skyline they honestly thought they were about to conquer. The room was deathly quiet, filled only with the faint hum of the central air conditioning and the arrogant tapping of Chelsea perfectly manicured fingernails against the polished mahogany table. She was completely ready to play the role of a high-powered negotiator. The heavy mahogany double doors at the far end of the room suddenly swung open with a resounding thud. Chelsea immediately stood up, smoothing down her white designer jacket and pasting on her absolute best fake corporate smile. She was fully prepared to shake hands with some ruthless white-collar developer to charm a corporate shark and sell my entire life down the river for a quick payday. But the man who confidently walked through those tall doors was not a stranger to her. It was me. Except I was not wearing my grease-stained denim overalls. I was not covered in cut pine sawdust, and I was not holding a rusty wrench. I walked into that immaculate room wearing a flawless custom-tailored $5,000 midnight blue Tom Ford suit. My shoes were polished Italian leather that gleamed under the recessed lighting. On my left wrist rested a solid gold Rolex watch, a personal reward to myself after closing my first major commercial real estate deal decades ago. My posture was perfectly straight, completely devoid of the tired old man act I usually put on at the hardware shop. I did not walk with a limp. I walked with the steady, heavy stride of an apex predator. Flanking me on either side were 3 high-powered corporate lawyers carrying thick black leather briefcases. One of them was Mr. Sterling, the very man Chelsea had spoken to on the phone when she arrogantly set up this meeting. We moved as a single impenetrable unit radiating absolute power and total authority. The sound of our footsteps echoed off the polished hardwood floor, demanding instant respect. I did not look like a man who belonged in a nursing home waiting to die. I looked exactly like a man who could buy and sell this entire skyscraper with a single phone call. Chelsea stared at me, completely frozen in place. Her fake corporate smile slowly melted off her face, replaced by sheer, utter confusion. She blinked several times as if she was trying to clear a mirage from her vision. She looked at my expensive suit, then at the silent lawyers surrounding me, and then back at my face. She actually let out a short, nervous laugh, genuinely believing that I had somehow followed them from the hardware store and snuck into the building. "Eugene, what on earth are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice cracking slightly as her natural arrogance tried to fight through her sudden rising panic. "Did you take the bus all the way downtown and follow us here? How did building security even let you up to this floor? This is a highly restricted executive level for actual business professionals. You need to turn around and leave right now before I call the guards and have you escorted out in handcuffs." Andre finally looked up from the table, and his jaw literally dropped. He was staring at my suit and the heavy gold watch on my wrist, completely bewildered. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights. Chelsea took an aggressive step forward, pointing her finger directly at my chest. "You cannot stop this sale." "Old man," she sneered, trying desperately to regain her false sense of superiority. "We are here to meet with the senior executives of Vanguard Real Estate Group. They are going to buy your land today, and there is absolutely nothing you can do about it, so go back to your rusty shop." I completely ignored her shrieking voice. I did not say a single word to her. I simply walked right past her, not even granting her the dignity of a glance in her direction. I walked straight to the massive leather chair at the very head of the long boardroom table, the chief executive chair. I gracefully unbuttoned my suit jacket, sat down, and folded my hands, resting them deliberately on the polished mahogany wood. I looked at her, waiting for the cold, hard reality to finally shatter her delusions. Mr. Sterling stepped forward and took his proper place, standing respectfully right beside my chair. He opened his leather briefcase and pulled out a stack of pristine legal folders, placing them neatly in front of me. He looked directly at Chelsea and spoke in a crisp, authoritative tone that commanded absolute silence. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, "allow me to formally introduce the founder and sole owner of the Vanguard Real Estate Group, Mr. Eugene Mitchell." The entire room went dead silent. The kind of absolute silence that rings loudly in your ears and makes the air feel incredibly heavy. Chelsea's face lost every single drop of color in an instant. She went as pale as a ghost, her eyes widening in absolute horror as her brain struggled to process the impossible truth. Andre stopped breathing entirely. He gripped the edge of the conference table, his knuckles turning completely white, staring at me as if I had just risen from the dead. I leaned forward in my leather chair, locking my cold eyes onto Chelsea's pale face. "You wanted to sell my hardware store to Vanguard?" I asked, my voice echoing deeply across the massive room. "Chelsea, I am Vanguard. I own the hardware store. I own the busy bakery next door. I own the commercial bank across the street. I own all 12 commercial buildings on that entire city block. My late wife Vivian and I bought every single one of those properties back in the 1980s when nobody else wanted them. We bought them when it was just a forgotten neighborhood full of boarded-up windows, crime, and broken dreams. We took massive risks, worked day and night, and built a massive empire out of dirt and sheer patience. I kept working at the hardware store because it kept me grounded. It reminded me of where I came from, and it helped me honor Vivian memory. Vanguard LLC is not just the legal name for a rusty little hardware store. It is a highly diversified $15 million commercial real estate portfolio. I let that massive, unimaginable number hang heavily in the air, allowing it to completely crush her arrogant, greedy soul. She started shaking uncontrollably. Her mouth opened and closed repeatedly, but no sound came out. She had proudly marched into my own corporate headquarters, demanding to sell my own company to myself. She had violently threatened to throw a multimillionaire into a state-run mental facility over a $200,000 hardware store that was just a personal hobby for me to pass the time. She was the absolute definition of a fool. But I was not finished dismantling her life. I reached into the top folder Mr. Sterling had provided. I pulled out a very specific legal document and slid it across the long polished table until it stopped right in front of her trembling hands. I looked at Andre, who was sweating profusely, his eyes darting frantically around the room looking for an escape door that simply did not exist. "You two have been living a completely fake life, trying to impress high society people who do not even care about you," I said coldly. "You took on massive crippling debt for a wedding reception you could not afford. You stole $15,000 from a sacred emergency fund meant to protect you. And you actually thought your grand financial salvation was selling your own father out to a faceless corporation." I tapped my index finger firmly on the document resting in front of them. "Look at the paper, Chelsea," I commanded, my voice leaving no room for disobedience. She slowly looked down her terrified eyes, scanning the top of the page. It was the commercial lease agreement for their luxury penthouse condo in Midtown. And guess who bought the Midtown condo tower you currently live in? "Late last year," I asked, letting a razor-sharp, triumphant smile finally cross my face. "Vanguard Real Estate Group. I bought it as a simple portfolio expansion to diversify my assets. That means I am not just your embarrassing father-in-law. I am your literal landlord." I leaned back comfortably in my leather chair, watching their entire fake universe collapse into dust right before my eyes. "You are currently 3 full months behind on your luxury rent," I stated loudly so everyone in the room, including my lawyers, could hear exactly what a massive failure she was. "You owe my corporate holding company exactly $18,000 in back rent and accumulated late fees. You came up to my executive boardroom today hoping to walk away with a $500,000 finder's fee to fund your fake lifestyle. Instead, you are walking away with absolutely nothing. You have no money in your bank accounts. You have no legal leverage over me. You have no future in this city. And as of this exact moment, you have absolutely no family left to steal from." Chelsea completely crumbled the very second the reality of her situation hit her. She dropped her extremely expensive designer handbag onto the hardwood floor and burst into frantic, heavy tears. She leaned over the massive mahogany table, begging me to understand her side of the story. She told me she always respected me deeply and that she was just heavily stressed out about the massive wedding debt. She claimed that she truly loved me like a father and that her terrible behavior was just a massive misunderstanding. I sat in the executive chair and watched her pathetic performance without a single ounce of pity in my heart. Then Andre collapsed right onto the expensive boardroom floor, falling directly to his knees. He grabbed the polished edge of the table, pleading loudly for my forgiveness. He cried heavily and pointed his shaking finger right at his wife, blaming Chelsea for manipulating his mind and forcing him to steal the money. I looked down at the son I had raised from a small boy into a grown man, and I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, hollow emptiness inside my chest. I leaned forward in my leather chair, locking eyes with both of them. I told them in a perfectly flat, calm voice that they should not expect any mercy or salvation from me. I reminded Chelsea of the exact words she had said at her fancy country club wedding when she banished me to the dark back corner next to the swinging kitchen doors. "I only help special people," I said, letting her own cruel words echo loudly in the silent boardroom. Mr. Sterling stepped forward and handed me 2 distinct manila folders. I slid the first one across the smooth table surface toward them. It was a formal legal 3-day eviction notice for their luxury midtown penthouse condo. I told them they had exactly 72 hours to pack up their completely fake lifestyle and vacate my property forever. Then I slid the second folder right next to it. It was a certified copy of a police report I had filed early that morning for the $15,000 stolen from our joint bank account. I told Andre that grand larceny is a serious felony, and my corporate lawyers would ensure the district attorney prosecutes it to the absolute fullest extent of the law. "You made your choices," I said, standing up and buttoning my tailored suit jacket. "Now you will face the absolute consequences of those choices." I motioned to the heavy double doors where 4 massive armed security guards were standing by. "You have 72 hours to vacate my property," I announced with total finality. "Security will escort you out of my building right now." Their entire fake world imploded with a speed that was almost breathtaking to witness from a distance. Within a single month, Chelsea filed for divorce, realizing that she was now legally tied to a man with absolutely no money, a shattered credit score, and pending felony charges. Her wealthy country club parents were entirely humiliated by the massive public scandal surrounding her greed. They completely refused to bail her out of her massive credit card debt, forcing her to declare total bankruptcy. The arrogant woman who thought she was going to be a high society millionaire was forced to move back into her parents' cramped, damp basement. She was completely stripped of her designer clothes, her fancy cars, and her unbearable arrogance. Her credit was permanently ruined, and her reputation in the city was completely destroyed. Andre suffered an even harsher fate. He lost his fancy corporate office job the very moment the police investigation became public knowledge. Cut completely out of my family trust and facing constantly mounting legal fees. He had absolutely no choice but to take a minimum wage job working the graveyard shift at a local shipping warehouse. Every single night, he has to do the exact kind of hard manual labor he used to mock me for doing just to pay off the massive financial restitution he owes me. I watch the legal updates from my attorneys without a single ounce of regret in my soul. They dug their own graves out of pure, limitless greed, and now they have to lie in them for the rest of their miserable lives. As for me, my life went right back to the simple, peaceful routine I have always loved so deeply. I took off the expensive tailored suit and put my old, dusty denim overalls right back on. I do not need the money. And I certainly do not need to show off my wealth to anyone in this city. I still go down to my corner hardware store every single morning. I sweep the concrete floors, organize the steel wrenches, and breathe in the comforting smell of cut pine and motor oil. Being in that small, quiet shop keeps me grounded and humble. It keeps me incredibly close to the beautiful memory of my late wife, Vivian. We built this massive commercial empire together from absolutely nothing, and her legacy deserves to be honored in the right way. Last week, I took a large portion of my commercial rent profits and established a massive college scholarship fund entirely under Vivian's name. It is designed specifically to pay full tuition for underprivileged Black youth right here in our Atlanta neighborhood, giving them the exact same opportunities I tried to give my own son. Money can buy a whole lot of things in this world, but it cannot buy class, and it certainly cannot buy loyalty. When people show you exactly who they are, you need to believe them the very first time. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect yourself? Let me know your story in the comments below. Do not forget to hit like and subscribe for more life stories. Stay strong and always protect your peace. The greatest lesson I learned from this entire ordeal is that true wealth has absolutely nothing to do with what is sitting in your bank account. Real wealth is the integrity, respect, and character you build over a lifetime of hard work. Greed completely blinds people to the value of genuine relationships, turning family members into nothing more than commodities to be exploited. When you ruthlessly chase money at the expense of basic human decency, you will inevitably end up losing both. Never let anyone devalue your honest sacrifices or make you feel small just because your success does not look like their shallow version of glamour. Protect your peace. Recognize your own immense worth and never be afraid to walk away from those who only see you as a stepping stone. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your own experiences with toxic people in the comments below.